The wind scratched across the empty plain, dragging dry whispers through brittle grass and carrying the ghost of a better season long gone. The house stood hunched on its foundation like it had aged a century in one long winter. Boards curled, paint flaked. The porch creaked under the weight of silence, and watching Ruth Taylor drove the rusted end of a fence post into parched soil with her bare hands, sweat and dust caked in the creases of her neck. Her palms had split days ago. She wrapped them in torn flour, sack linen, and kept working. Behind her, a toddler cried weakly on a wool blanket spread across the dirt. Too hot to scream, too hungry to sleep, the post tilted sideways, she cursed. Under her breath, and shoved it deeper with her shoulder, breath caught in her throat. Her dress, what was left of it, flapped at the hem where stitching had given up. Once deep blue, it had faded into something between ash and denim. Her boots didn't match. Her husband had died last December. The same day the blizzard buried the barn roof and their mule froze upright by the well. Her back ached, her chest burned. But if she stopped moving, she might collapse, and if she collapsed, the whole house might crumble right beside her. A cloud of dust rolled in from the southern ridge. Horse hooves. She froze, fingers tightening on the splintered post. Her oldest boy, Caleb, peeked through a cracked window, his face hollowed out by too many nights without meat. Ruth gestured for him to stay inside. The rider slowed as he neared the fence, a man in a wide-brimmed hat and dust-gray coat. Tall, solid, quiet, his boots hit the ground without a word. He walked toward her, reins dangling from one hand, the other resting near his belt, not threatening. "Not relaxed either. Double quotes, Mrs. Taylor," he said, voice like gravel and distance. "Name's Granger, Thomas Granger?" She nodded once, wary, eyes scanning him like she could guess his reason by the shape of his shadow. "I heard you were looking for work," he said. Her shoulders stiffened. "Not charity," she answered. "Steady. I need my barn cleaned. Muck stacked. Hay lifted." "It ain't easy work?" "I got 4 children," she said. "You need the work, or don't you?" She hesitated. The fence leaned crooked. The well was almost dry. The flour tin was down to dust and silence. She opened her mouth, then closed it. "I'll manage," she muttered. He gave a tight nod, stepped back into the saddle, and turned the horse in one clean motion. "Barn's open," he said without looking back. "You come when you're ready." The dust followed him out like a question. Ruth watched until he vanished over the ridge. Then she looked at her hands raw, trembling, and at the toddler still crying behind her. Cheeks sunburnt, lips dry. That night the bread she made didn't rise. There wasn't enough yeast left in the jar. She gave her portion to Caleb, who tried to hide his hunger like a man twice his age. When he fainted near the stove, she caught him before he hit the floor. The next morning, the horizon glowed with a new kind of surrender. Ruth walked alone across the dry prairie, dress flapping, dust trailing behind her. She didn't knock to beg. She knocked because pride couldn't feed 4 hungry mouths anymore. The barn was bigger than she expected, older too. The smell of hay and dried manure clung to the rafters like an old wound, and every board seemed to carry the weight of 100 forgotten storms. Ruth tied her hair back with a strip of cloth, and rolled up her sleeves, the linen already stained, before she'd touched a single pitchfork. Thomas Granger wasn't there when she arrived that first day, but a tin plate of biscuits sat near the stall rail, wrapped in muslin. Next to it, a small jar of lard and a bundle of salt pork. She stared at it a moment too long before tucking it into her satchel and starting the work. She moved like someone used to pain, quiet, deliberate, methodical. She shoveled out the muck, stacked hay, reset broken stall gates, even mended the harness that hung limp from a nail. She didn't speak. She didn't look toward the house, though she felt his eyes once, just once, from the edge of the field. Day after day he left food, and she left before the sunset, dragging her body back across the ridge to the dying farm where her children waited for whatever scraps she could carry. One evening, bone-tired and aching, she found a boot print in the dirt by the well. Her heart jumped before she even saw the man, her late husband's brother, standing on her porch with papers in hand and a smirk carved deep into his sunburnt face. "This land's not yours," he said, "not legally. Your name ain't on nothing." She stepped between him and the door, shotgun gripped with both hands, the barrel wobbling with the effort to hold it straight. "You step back off my land?" "Wade," he laughed like someone who thought the world owed him power. "You think I won't take it to court? You got no claim. No man to defend you, no deed." "I got enough to defend what's mine," she said, even though her arms trembled, even though the weight of the shotgun felt like lifting a coffin. Wade stepped down slow, but he left with his threats trailing behind him like mud on boots. That night she cried where the children couldn't see. The next morning, Thomas Granger stood at the edge of her property line. He didn't ask what had happened. He didn't speak. He just handed her a sack of oats and a bundle of fence nails. Then he rode away. Later that week she caught him crouched beside a horse in the paddock, wrapping its leg with strips of cloth soaked in vinegar and turpentine. The horse jerked and neighed, flinching against his touch. "She's too proud to let you near it," Ruth said quietly. Granger looked up, surprised. She stepped forward. "Wrap tighter near the joint," she said, "looser near the hoof." He handed her the cloth without a word. Their fingers didn't touch, but something passed between them anyway. That afternoon, it rained, not a light spring rain. A thunderstorm that rolled over the horizon like a judgment, tearing open the clouds and hurling wind through the prairie. She was still in the barn, stacking hay in the loft, when the sky split with lightning. He came running, coat soaked, boots sinking into the mud. "You'll get killed in here," he said over the storm. She hesitated. The old Ruth might have insisted on staying. But her knees hurt, her chest was cold, and for once, pride took second place to survival. He opened the front room of his house for her and the children. The youngest cried at the sound of thunder, but he lit a lamp and placed it near the hearth, his movements careful, practiced. "Your kids can take the bed," he said. "Floor's warm enough for you, if you want." She nodded, whispered thank you, and waited until they were asleep before sitting near the fire with her arms wrapped around her knees. His house was spare but clean. A single photograph hung on the wall above the mantel, sepia-toned, fading. A woman with calm eyes and an infant in her arms. Both were gone, and the way the frame tilted told her it had been there too long to take down. She didn't ask. He didn't offer. But in his silence she saw her own reflection, a grief buried so deep it had hardened like winter clay. When she returned to the barn 2 mornings later, her oldest son Caleb found his boots polished and restitched, laces new. He said nothing. She said nothing. But she looked across the field where Granger rebuilt his fences alone, and she raised one hand, just slightly. He nodded in return, not a wave, not a gesture. Just a silent understanding between two people who had lost two. Much and were learning, slowly, how to begin again. The man wore a crisp coat and spectacles too clean for the dust-blown prairie. He rode in with an air of importance, not bothering to tip his hat as he dismounted by Ruth's fence. His boots left narrow prints in the dry soil, and his eyes scanned her property like it was already his. "Mrs. Taylor," he said, unfolding papers from a stiff leather pouch. "I'm here on behalf of Mr. Wade Taylor. Your husband's next of kin." Ruth straightened, eyes squinting against the sun. Her children sat quietly on the porch steps, sensing something was wrong. "He's claiming legal ownership of this land," the man continued. "It appears your name's not on any deed." She wiped her hands on her skirt and stood her ground. "My name's on every board of this house," she said. "Every inch of this dirt, I earned it." "Be reasonable," the surveyor replied. "Sign the land over and you won't face court fees. I'd rather lose it in a fight than hand it over like a dish." His mouth twitched, not quite a smirk. He handed her the paper and turned away, confident. Ruth let it flutter too. The ground as he rode off, hooves stirring dust behind him like a snake dragging its tail. That night the moon was pale and thin. Ruth awoke to the low bleating of her last goat, a sound too sharp, too panicked. Then came the snap of wood, a clatter of hooves, and silence. She reached the door just in time to see shadows disappearing. Into the darkness, men on horseback, bandits, thieves. One of them carried a rifle slung over his back. She grabbed the shotgun, heart pounding, but it was too late. The goat was gone. The children huddled inside, wide-eyed and shivering. A sharp cry cut through the dark. It was Eli, her youngest boy. He'd wandered out barefoot, looking for the goat before she could stop him. Then she saw it. A rattlesnake, coiled and ready, hidden in the brush just feet from where Eli stood frozen in his nightshirt. A shot rang out, clean and fast. The snake jerked and fell limp. Thomas Granger rode in from the ridge, rifle still warm in his hands. He jumped down and scooped Eli up with one arm, cradling the boy against his chest like he'd done it 100 times. "Where's your light?" he asked, breath short. "You can't fight ghosts in the dark." Ruth didn't answer. Her throat had closed around something too heavy for words. Before dawn, another man appeared, not on horseback. On foot, he stepped out from the edge of the woods, tall and quiet, skin painted in the deep tones of dusk and bark. He wore layers of hides and feathers, and his eyes were like stone, unreadable but alive. Red Elk? Granger stood still when he saw him, hand lifted in silent greeting. Ruth watched the two men nod, no words exchanged. Red Elk circled her fence. Once, silent. He knelt beside the splintered post where the goat had been tethered, touched the broken rope, and stood again. "Too many wolves," he said, voice deep and patient. "Not enough traps." Ruth clenched her jaw, arms crossed. Her pride was wearing thin, frayed like the hem of her dress. Her children were half-starved, her land barely standing. She hadn't slept in days. She sank down beside the well and covered her face with both hands. Her shoulders trembled. Granger didn't speak. He sat beside her, his silence heavy but not suffocating. "I'm tired," she whispered. "So damn tired." "I know," he said. "You'll lose nothing helping me," she said bitterly. "But I'll lose myself letting you." "I'm not offering you charity," he said. "I'm offering you shelter, work, a chance." She looked at him through wet eyes. "What do you get out of it?" "Company that doesn't lie," he said, "and a harvest I can't bring in alone." It wasn't pity, it wasn't control. It was something else. Something she hadn't felt since her husband's voice faded in the dark that winter respect. He told her about the back cabin on his land. It needed fixing, but the roof held. There was a well, a garden plot that hadn't been used in years. If she and the children moved there, they could work the land together, keep what they grew, share what they needed. Nothing more? No promises? No claims? Ruth said nothing at first. Her hands were shaking too much. But when she looked at her children, sleeping side by side on the floor with their bellies half full, and no fences between them and the night, she knew she was done surviving alone. The world wasn't fair to women like her. But for once, someone offered her a choice that wasn't dressed in pity or possession. The cabin sat low in the valley, shaded by cottonwoods and nestled against a bend in the creek that still trickled, even in the dry season. Its shutters hung crooked, the steps creaked, and the chimney leaned slightly to the east, but the roof held and the floor was dry. That was enough. Ruth moved in with the children on a Sunday morning, carrying what little they had in baskets made of old feed sacks and stitched hope. Granger helped patch the shutters. Red Elk appeared from the tree line that afternoon, dragging a snare line behind him and showing Caleb how to set traps with hands silent as smoke. The garden was wild and tangled, overrun with weeds and crows that picked at the roots. Ruth spent long hours digging, her fingers black with soil. Red Elk taught her to stake cloth along the rows, and hangbones that clattered in the wind crows feared sound more than steel. Granger worked beside her without a word, lifting fence posts, hauling buckets, building the rhythm of shared labor. He didn't offer advice unless she asked, and when she stumbled from exhaustion one evening, he simply handed her a tin of salve without comment. Their silence had changed. It was no longer distance, but understanding. By summer's end, corn rose waist-high, and the children had color in their cheeks again. Then, one night, her youngest Lily woke with a fever so hot it made her eyes glassy and her breath come in tiny rattles. Ruth panicked, holding the girl to her chest, whispering prayers she hadn't spoken in years. Without a word, Granger saddled his horse. The moon wasn't even overhead yet when he disappeared into the dark. He returned near dawn, his shirt soaked through, eyes red from dust. He handed Ruth a brown pouch with 3 folded cloths inside medicine from a healer in a town 15 miles east. Lily lived. 2 weeks later, Ruth rode into town for flour and oil. She hadn't been back since the move. Heads turned. Whispers curled through the street like wood smoke. Wade stood outside the post office, smirking with a new layer by his side. "You moved in with the rancher, huh?" He said loud enough for everyone to hear. "Smart play, Ruth, but that deed still ain't yours." People paused in their steps. Ruth stood straight, face unreadable. Then came the sound of boots behind her. Granger, stepping through the dust, hands at his sides, quiet as always. "She doesn't stand alone anymore," he said. Wade shifted, swallowed his next insult, and turned away. That night, the wind shifted. A scent of smoke rolled in over the hills. The chickens scattered, uneasy. Red Elk found the track's first 3 men, boots worn, one with a limp. They were coming back. Ruth didn't flinch. She and Granger moved quick, laying lanterns around the property. Red Elk placed snares at the tree line. Caleb helped load the shotgun with hands steady for the first time in months. When the bandits came, torches in hand, calling threats from the dark, Ruth waited behind the porch rail, heart drumming. The trap was sprung with a snap of wire and a cry of surprise. Gunfire broke the silence. Granger fired once. Then twice. Red Elk flanked from the left, silent as fog, driving them toward the cabin. One of the men raised a pistol toward the porch toward her children inside. Ruth stepped forward and pulled the trigger. The man dropped where he stood. Her hands didn't shake. By morning, the smoke had cleared. The bandits were gone, carried off in silence. The children stood in the doorway, not crying, not afraid, just watching their mother in awe. The summer rolled into autumn. The corn ripened gold. The house grew. Heavier with laughter, Lily chased chickens. Caleb mended traps. Ruth hung fresh herbs from the rafters. The cabin wasn't just shelter anymore. It was becoming a home. One quiet evening, Granger sat beside the fire, running a thumb over the edge of a folded paper. He handed it to Ruth, a deed. Her name inked. Clearly, a portion of his land signed over with no conditions. She looked at him a long time. "Land can be given," she said softly. "But trust, that's earned." He didn't reply, but his eyes met hers in the flicker of firelight. And that was enough. That night, she walked out to the edge of the garden. The stars blinked above like secrets waiting to be named. Red Elk stood by the trees, nodding once before fading into the dark. Ruth dug a small hole near the porch steps and placed a single apple seed in the soil, pressed it gently, covered it. Behind her, Granger joined her in silence. Together they stood there, looking down at what they'd planted. Not just a tree, but a beginning. She came to clean his barn. But what she cleared was something else, an ache both of them had buried under years of silence. And in the land between them, something finally grew. In the dust and silence of the old frontier, survival meant more than grit. It meant learning when to fight and when to let someone in. If Ruth's journey moved you, share your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe, and join us again for more true-hearted stories of strength, survival, and silent love.